Drinking in the morning sun, blinking in the morning sun, shaking off the heavy one.
This ain't complicated as your mind's a way inside.
Hey folks, so I was reading an article about sophomore slumps the other day, and it really got me thinking, you know, I'd love to do a video about artists or bands who did not follow up a really, really good debut album with a second album. And I was compiling a list and thought, oh, this would be a fun video, I think people would enjoy this. And then I really had kind of compiled quite a list of especially more recent bands that really have not had a great second album, especially in the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And it was getting a little bit negative, I think, and, you know, with being YouTube and people tend, you know, there's always going to be somebody who likes it more than their debut album. There's always going to be somebody who loves that album and is kind of widely thought of as not so good. So I just said, you know, I'm just going to scrap this idea. So what I decided to do is just flip it around and say no sophomore slump bands or artists that really came back strong, and even maybe in some cases stronger than their first debut album. So that's what we're going to do today. I hope you find it fun. Keep in mind, if you're watching this and you're deciding to comment, this is my list, and you know, I did put a lot of thought into it, and I had a list of maybe 50 or so records that I thought would qualify for really good, solid second albums. Some of them were so obvious, though, that I decided just to cut them because they're talked about to death, like Led Zeppelin 2, or, you know, the Beatles' second album, or things like that, things of that nature. I did leave a few in that I really felt like absolutely defined my music taste, and I have loved them since day one. So I kept them in, but I tried to kind of vary the list up a little bit, so I'm not going to drag it out too long before I just start talking about it, and I'm not going to go into great detail about all these albums because the video would be too long, and I just kind of want to get through this. But I picked 20 sophomore albums that I thought were worthy of being put on the best all-time second albums by a band or artist. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to start it off with number 20, and really one of my all-time favorite records, and I suppose you could say that about all of these, really. But this one in particular, really, I look at it at number 20 and think, how could it possibly be at number 20? But nevertheless, as I was going through, I tried to be fair. And I picked New Order, Power, Corruption, and Lies. This came out in, I do have a list here, 1983, and it was the follow-up to an album called Movement. The second album from New Order is just widely considered maybe their best album. And it's just utterly brilliant, really, from start to finish. And I think this is where New Order kind of found themselves after losing Ian Curtis and having to break up Joy Division. Movement's a good album, don't get me wrong, but this one is by far better, and I really felt like it was worthy to include on a list like this. So number 20, Power, Corruption, and Lies from New Order. So if you haven't listened to this record and you are curious about New Order, this would be a great place to start your journey. So there you have number 20. Number 19 is, I picked this one and included it on the list. I love the album, but it probably is maybe the most obscure album, at least for people who watch this channel faithfully. I think a lot of people may not know this record. And I say it's probably 50-50, but a lot of people do, and I wanted to include it because it is, for me, by far their best album, and that is Slowdive, and that it's called Sovluki or Sovlaki. Yeah, I'm not really sure what that means. I think it's like a Greek dish, but I could be wrong. Anyway, this is a terrific album, and I wanted to show it because it may be my one and only chance to talk about this band, who knows. But it is terrific, and if you like shoegaze music and you like kind of driving, you know, more drone type guitars, this would be a great album for you. It's wide ranging though in styles, really, and again, I feel like it's their best album. So this came out in 1992, and I'm happy to say that the album that they came out with last year is also very, very good. So if you haven't checked out Slowdive, I thought this would be a good chance for me to talk about Slowdive. So there you have number 19. Number 18 I included because this guy decided to go solo in the 80s, and everybody talks about his debut album, which I admit is an absolute masterpiece. I adore it from start to finish, but I do think the second album is nearly as good, and hardly anybody ever talks about this one, and I'm talking about Donald Fagen's Kamakiriad, the follow-up to The Nightfly. This came out in I have 93 written, but I don't think that's right. I think it's 83. Let's see if it says here. Well, doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm almost sure it's at 83. And anyway, this is a really, really good album. And again, hardly anybody talks about it. And it's very hard to find on vinyl. Desperately needs a reissue. I don't know why this album has never, in my knowledge, never had a reissue. But every song on here is great. But I particularly love the song Snowbound. I just have a, it just puts me in a mood. And it's just one of the great tracks from Donald Fagen. So if you only know Donald Fagen from The Nightfly, give his other albums a chance, in particular Kamakiriad from 1983. Even though I wrote 93, that can't possibly be right. Okay, number 17 is an artist that has done so much through the years that it's hard to kind of say, okay, well, this is worthy of a list like this, but I do feel like this is the album that he kind of defined himself as breaking away from what he was known for at the time, and that was one of the members of Roxy Music. This is Brian Eno's Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy. And by the way, this is a wonderful pressing of it. If you haven't checked out these remasters from Abbey Road, they do a really, really good job. The downside is they're spread out over 2 LPs, 45 RPM, so there's a lot of flipping involved, but if you like high quality sound, it's about as good as it gets. But back to the album, I mean, this again is kind of a career defining moment for Brian Eno, and you know, for him to break away from Roxy Music and do his own thing, this is the album that really put him on the map as far as I'm concerned, and it's just one of his masterpieces. I mean, you can't say it's the masterpiece, but because he has so much, but this is a really, really good album. So if you've never heard it and you want to take a chance and try something a little bit different, if you like David Bowie and you like that kind of glam type rock, this would be right up your alley. So Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy is number 18 on my list of sophomore albums. Number 16, I did debate about this one a little bit because it's certainly not one of their more loved albums, but I think it's very underappreciated, and it really helped define them, whereas their debut album is almost entirely different from their normal style, and that is The Cure's 17 Seconds. This album, they kind of came into their own again, and they really started sounding like The Cure that we know and love today. Not quite developed yet, but started to see hints of it for sure. And this is an album that contains great songs, but you know, the song A Forest is probably the first song from The Cure that sounds very much like The Cure. And great album here. So if you haven't heard 17 Seconds, this came out in 1980, and I should have mentioned that Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy prior came out in 1974. So trying to get a wide range of years here. You'll see some more modern stuff as we move forward, but 1980 on this one, and check out 17 Seconds from The Cure, landing at. So moving on, we've got here number 15, one of the all-time classics really, and I guess kind of technically the only band that appears twice on my list here of sophomore albums, and that is the second album from Joy Division, Closer. Closer came out in 1980, so it was just 3 years apart from the second album from New Order. And everybody knows the story about this being the final album from Joy Division, and such an iconic album at that. A real true masterpiece, and I'm sure for many people it would be their first choice for second album, sophomore album. But it is an absolute masterpiece, and this is a nice original British copy, oh, I'm sorry, this is the original US copy. So anyway, I'm not going to be able to talk too long about every album, but if for some reason you've never heard Closer by Joy Division, you gotta do it. Okay, number 14 comes in from 1984, and this is a band too that had good album after good album after good album, and this is pretty widely considered to be a great second album and that is 1984's Reckoning from REM. This has the hit single Pretty Persuasion on it, so if you know that track, early REM is so good, and you know, I certainly grew up on it in the early 90s, so it's just a really fantastic listen. I love the artwork, I love everything about this album, so it most certainly had to make my list of all-time best second album. Not saying their first one was bad by any means, but to be able to follow it up with another really widely considered masterpiece, I think, is saying a lot. So REM Reckoning comes in at number 14. Moving on to number 13, a completely different shift in direction and time period, going way back to 1971. Now this is maybe one of those obvious choices that I decided to leave, but I left it because this is an album that has meant so much to me over the years, and I remember it so much as a kid. You know, it was maybe one of my very first loves as far as music goes, and that is Paul and Linda McCartney's Ram. You know, everybody knows this record, so there isn't too much to talk about, but after the breakup of the Beatles, you know, Paul McCartney came out lukewarm, I'd say, with his debut album, and then followed that up with Ram, that over time has really come to be considered one of his finest records. And even though it wasn't when it came out, unfortunately, people were so harsh on Paul McCartney's early music for obvious reasons, I guess, because they were just so bitter about the breakup of the Beatles. But this is a really good album, and this is one of his archive edition here, 2 LPs. Fantastic listen. So coming in at number 13, a very obvious choice, but one that I really felt just absolutely had to be on the list, and that is Ram. All right, again, moving much further into the timeline here. This is the most current album on the list of 20, and it comes from 2002. So as you can see, there isn't a whole lot that I consider the best of sophomore albums when it comes to very modern music, but 2002, at least we found something. And to me, this is their masterpiece. This is their album, and the album, well, I love the debut too, but this is the one that's like, wow. It really changed so many people's opinions of this band, and I love it to death. This is Coldplay's A Rush of Blood to the Head, and I think most people might consider this their best work. You know, I'm sure there'll be comments saying it's not as good as Parachutes, or it's not as good as blah blah blah, but for me, it's my list, and this is the album for me from Coldplay. And not saying I don't love some of the others, especially like Ghost Stories, a much more current album, but this is still the one for me. You know, had Clocks and Politic and God Put a Smile on Your Face and the title track and In My Place. I mean, it was just amazing. One of the very first records I ever purchased on vinyl when I got back into vinyl. As you can see, I've had it for a while, and it's getting a bit of ring wear. So anyway, fantastic, and this is a brilliant choice, I think. Number 12. And number 11, this is an album that I knew nothing about growing up. This came out in 1991, so I was still a young person. And I've only really found them in the last, I don't know, 7, 8 years. And it has now become one of my go-to records. I absolutely love this album, like so many people. And it's just bold and brash, and you know, it's just in your face, very, very heavy, deep guitar shoegaze, and that is My Bloody Valentine's Loveless. Just a fantastic album. I mean, you know, maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but I think anyone who's ever liked a guitar has to find something really, really special about this record. It's just got tons of feedback and tons of fuzz, and I mean, it's just so good. You got to crank it, you got to play it loud, and it's just really, really good. And they finally, after all these years, got a nice copy of it. They finally repressed it in a very nice audiophile quality. So anyway, number 11 goes to My Bloody Valentine and Loveless from 1991. So happy that I'm now a big fan of My Bloody Valentine. So we're moving into the top 10 here, and we're getting into the, well, I can't even say getting into the good stuff, because on a list like this, it's all amazing, you know, so you just can't find anything that you don't like here. So anyway, at number 10, 1994, this is an album that shocked a lot of people, including me, and when I first heard it, I was like, oh my god, this is just absolutely brutal and difficult to listen to. But, you know, now it's come to, you know, as time goes on, it, you know, really is a very special album, and certainly one that you might have to be in a mood for, because it is very dark and almost disturbing at times. But Nine Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral, from 1994, is just an absolute classic. So what can you say? I mean, this is one of those albums that it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but you've got to appreciate it for what it is. And it is really simply one of a kind. And I'm sure Trent Reznor will go down as one of the greats ever. And I would say this will probably be his all-time classic album. So 1994, Downward Spiral, Nine Inch Nails. Give it a try. It's loud and it's abrasive, but I think that for most people you're going to find something you like on it for sure. So give that one a go. All right, number 9. Probably get some flack for this because I'm sure this will be number 1 on many people's list. But again, bit of an obvious choice, but I would say, even though I'm not the biggest fan of this band, this one definitely deserves to be on the best list of second albums. And that is What's the Story, Morning Glory from Oasis. Now, I say I'm not the biggest fan of Oasis because when I say that, there are people who just worship this band. And I would say that they're a little overrated, and I don't mean that to be taken as a negative. But when somebody compares Oasis to the Beatles and the greats of all time, I take exception to that. I think they had 3 really, really spectacular albums as being my personal favorite, and the rest are somewhat mediocre. But anyway, this is a really fantastic album. I mean, it's got Wonderwall. I mean, how can you not love it? I mean, every song on here, I'm not going to name songs because there really aren't any bad songs on here. It is pretty darn special. And believe me, if all their records were this good, I would agree with everybody saying, you know, they are one of the great bands of all time. But, you know, I've just said it, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And don't hate me in the comments. I'm entitled to my opinion. I like Oasis. I am a fan. Especially love Noel Gallagher. But, you know, some of their albums just don't cut it for me. But, you know, this is a really, really special one. So I love that album, and it's a definite go-to one for me to this day. And number 8, I'm sorry, that was 1995 from Oasis. Number 8 comes from the same year, 1995. Pretty damn good year for music, right? Now this one is quite a different album from their debut album, and one that I particularly love a lot more than their debut album, and I think most people agree with me there. That this is Radiohead, the band's. This is maybe their most accessible album. I mean, it's got the most sing-along songs, I guess you could say. You know, maybe their most single-driven album. A little bit on the commercial side, I suppose you could say. But I love it, and I still think it's maybe in their top 3 albums ever. And I personally love it more than some of the ones that are wildly hailed as, you know, absolute classics, like OK Computer. I prefer the Bends, but that's me. So number 8, Radiohead, the Bends, 1995. Very, very great album. And again, I say this a lot, but if you're new to Radiohead, this would be a really good place to start for you. So there you have it, 1995. 1981, so we're going back again in time here for number 7. And this is an album that kind of gets beat up a little bit. And I don't know why, really. You know, it maybe does stand out as a little bit of a misfit compared, you know, when you're talking about their first 4 albums. This one does maybe seem a little out of place, but it is, for me, a great listen. It was a great listen in 81. It's a great listen today, and that is U2's October. The title track just gives me chills. You know, it's got Gloria on it. I mean, come on. You know, Rejoice and Fire and you know, I mean, come on. I don't know why this album gets a little bit of a bad rap, but to me, it's a very, very good album and one of U2's best. All their early stuff for me is untouchable. So anyway, 1981, number 7, October from U2. And then finally we've got here, before the top 5 anyway, and this one has just grown on me so much in the past, I'd say 2 years. And every time I start thinking about how I'm going to rank this guy's albums, this one always sneaks up and saying, I think it's my favorite. But then again, when I put on some of his other records, I think those are my favorites. But anyway, from 1993, we've got Wildwood from Paul Weller. I've become such a huge, huge Paul Weller fan in the past 5 years. Started off with a collection box set, you know, of just kind of a little bit of everything called Hit Parade, where it had the Jam and Style Council and kind of the best of his solo stuff. And I just never looked back. I mean, just one thing after the other. So Wildwood is a fantastic record. If you've never heard the title track, I mean, you just got to hear it, because it's one of those songs that will just make you cry and melt. Love it so much. 1993, Paul Weller. Maybe his best album, or one of his top 4, 3, you know, I don't know. I wouldn't even want to dare at this point rank Paul Weller's albums, because they're all pretty damn good. So anyway, Wildwood, if you haven't heard it, please check it out. Check out Paul Weller. He deserves so much more than he gets, at least in America. Almost a forgotten artist here. It's so sad. But nevertheless, I'm so happy to show it to you as my in my sophomore albums that really stand out as brilliant. Definitely a good. So we're moving into the top 5 now, and you're probably asking yourself, what on earth could possibly top what you've already shown? And again, it's a list, it's a subjective, it could change tomorrow, but you know, this is what I came up with in the past 48 hours. As I was thinking about this video, and at number 5, oh, we're going way back in time here. I think this may be the second oldest album on my list. There's still one to go that I think is just a few months older. But as second albums go, it's about as good as it gets. And that is Cream's Disraeli Gears. Wow, what a record. I mean, I love everything about it. Eric Clapton, you know, he became a legend off this album alone. And it's just so, so good. Sunshine of Your Love and Strange Brew, come on, man. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. So, it's fantastic. You know, if you haven't checked out Cream, if you're a fan of Eric Clapton or anything he's ever done, I don't know what you're waiting for, but I'm sure it's a pretty short list of people who've never heard this record, but it is brilliant, and I love, I mean, maybe I'll make this the thumbnail, because look at that. I mean, it's just so amazing. Just, you know, just harkens back to that time. So anyway, 1967's Cream, Disraeli Gears at number 5. And now you're really thinking, what could get better than that? But, you know, I guess I have to carry on somehow. Number 4 from 1970. Again, this is an artist that I have only liked for a short period. I say short, maybe 3 or 4 years. I mean, I've liked him. I've liked some of the songs I've heard, but I never collected his music. And, you know, you think about something that's 50 years old, nearly. It's just unbelievable that it's taken me this long to appreciate Santana. And this is Abraxas, the second album from Santana. It is so good. I mean, this is an album you can put on from start to finish, and it just really, really transports you to a different place and a different time. And what can you say? I mean, it's just absolute. I keep using the word brilliant, but I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's just really special. This is terrific. If you haven't heard it, please, what are you waiting for? Like me, don't wait 50 years to get into Santana, because you'll be doing yourself an injustice for any music fan. He's a guitar god, just like Eric Clapton before him. So 1970, Abraxas, Carlos Santana, fantastic. All right, number 3. This is kind of high on my list, but you know, I'm trying to think about things that have meant the most to me over the years. And this is an album that really, really, really got my attention in 1993. And still to this day, when I put it on, it's like, wow, what a record. I mean, it's just, it's got to be one of the greats of all time. I mean, it's probably one of the most influential albums of all time, even though it's still modern, you know, from the 90s. So amazing. And that is Siamese Dream from the Smashing Pumpkins. Now, I personally don't love all of their albums, certainly not to this level, but their first 3 were pretty amazing. And at that time, I really thought that they were going to be the biggest band, and maybe for a short time they were the biggest band in the world. But unreal, this record. I mean, it's just, it's godlike, really. I don't have an original copy of it. This is a repress, but it sounds so good. I'd like to get an original copy, but they're quite pricey. And this sounds so good, it's not that big a deal to me, but unfortunate that when Smashing Pumpkins did do their reissue campaign, that they did amazing sounding vinyl, really, really quality, but they decided to change the covers. I mean, it is still the same image of the young Siamese twins here, but they're completely different coloring, and it's got more of a, reflectiveness to it, and I don't like it as much. I wish they would have kept the original, but nevertheless, I mean, the sound is what's important, and it's really, really good. All right, so here we're going back, way back. I think this is the oldest record in my countdown here of the great sophomore albums ever. Number 2, an album that really defined a whole genre of music, you know, and talk about a change from their first album, completely revamped sound. I won't drag it out. It's Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. Oh, what an album. I mean, it's just remarkable, really, how people were so creative back then. It's unbelievable, you know, to do kind of symphonic rock, orchestrated like this, that nobody had done at the time. This was so groundbreaking and so revolutionary. It's one of a kind, really one of a kind second album for me. And Nights in White Satin, come on. Anyway, Days of Future Past, 1967, lands at number 2 on my countdown of great second sophomore albums. So happy, and I'm so happy I have a mobile fidelity copy of it. Really fortunate. And then finally, what could top those, right? Well, this one is a little bit of a personal bias. I adore this album. I adored it the second it came out. I played it until I couldn't play it anymore. And I think I burned through a couple CDs and a cassette and several different records. I mean, I play this record probably more than anything in my entire collection. And no joke. I love it. I mean, it's one of the greats of all time for me. And you're probably going to comment and say, oh, it's not near as good as Santana. It's not near as good as Ram. It's not near as good as, you know, some of the other things you showed. But for me, it is. And it's just special. And that is Tears for Fears, Songs from the Big Chair. Absolutely amazing record, in my opinion. From start to finish, it defines the decade as far as I'm concerned. And 1985, it's so good. And, you know, you guys know what's on here. Everybody wants to rule the world and shout, and mothers talk, and I believe, and listen, and head over heels. I mean, it's just so good from start to finish again. And I think I'll go play it right now. Why not? You know, I've played it about 1 billion times, so what's one more? So, number 1, Tears for Fears. I don't doubt. I wonder how many people would guess that would have been my number 1. Probably not too many. So anyway, I had fun with this. I hope you did too, you know, and I am glad that I decided to kind of flip it. When I started thinking about this video, I was going to do a, you know, sophomore slumps, you know, what's gone wrong. You know, you had such a great debut album and you came back with that. But it started getting more and more negative, and it's like, that's just not me. I like to keep things positive. So I decided to do my favorite, my top 20, at least for today. I mean, I left off 30, 50, who knows how many other second albums that I love. But you got to cut it off somewhere, and this is already going to be way too long. So thanks for sticking with me. Hope you enjoyed it. And please, you know, I kind of said, you know, don't beat me up for my choices, because they are my choices and I own them, and I'm proud to say that I do. But I want to hear your opinions. I want to hear what you think is your favorite sophomore second albums of all time. Don't confuse those two things if you're listening. So anyway, I better cut it off. I could ramble on for another 20 minutes, I'm sure. But thank you all so much for watching. Hope you all have a good weekend. And until next time, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.